is have Nicole back from Second Nature go through some of the work they've been doing, and she can introduce herself and Second Nature and some of the modeling that they've been working on. But what I thought it was important for all of us to hear her presentation is for a couple of reasons. One, the model and the tool that she uses will be likely used by municipalities to help with their compliance, but it also really helps inform how permittees, specifically ones using the Track 2, will demonstrate compliance with Track 2. And so it helps illuminate exactly what Track 2 is, what the monitoring will require, and how we can kind of watchdog that to make sure that they're complying with the trash policy. And then a second piece of it that Nicole will get into is this tool and model that Second Nature has created provides the opportunity for NGOs to help with some of the visual compliance monitoring kind of through crowdsourcing, and she'll get into that application on the tool. But just to step back real fast to explain, the trash policy toolkit that we have on our website has a trash monitoring memo. It's a bit technical and legal, but it does talk about how we want the state and regional water boards to require for the visual assessment for Track 2, how to frame that in the permit so it's legal and enforceable. And then it also gets into some pretty technical science stuff on the receiving water, and which isn't part of what we're going to talk about today. So just I'd go view that at some point. There's also the briefer that talks about the trash policy in the two different tracks, and I'm just going to lay it out real quick, and then Nicole can get into the details. But hopefully you all know by now that there's two tracks in the trash policy. Track 1 requires the full capture devices to be put into 100% of storm drains, and that track really only requires O&M maintenance reporting. It doesn't require monitoring like we're going to talk about today. Track 2 requires, really, you can do anything. You can do source control, you can do more trash cans, you can do full capture, you can do street sweeping. It's really whatever the permittee wants, but they need to demonstrate that they're reducing trash to the level of Track 1. And that's where the kind of the rub happens. Is we had a tough time during the trash policy development of figuring out how they were going to measure whether they were complying with Track 1 and how they would demonstrate compliance. And so we were always trying to incentivize actually Track 1 because Track 2 was so hard to demonstrate compliance that we thought people would be doing a lot of paper exercises and not really putting things in the ground to come into compliance. And so everyone, the stakeholders, even the state water board, kind of punted on how they're going to do the monitoring. There's some guidelines in there. There's some questions in there that for the trash policy champions can go to our toolkit and look at what those questions are. But there wasn't really a demonstrated way of how they were going to do the monitoring. So what first came out after the trash policy was developed was Region 2, who's been working on a trash program for quite a while now, created this visual assessment program or monitoring compliance option. And I'm not an expert on the visual assessment. Nicole could probably explain it better, but essentially what's being done is you would go around through your priority areas that need to come into compliance, and you would visually assess, giving it a grade of A to F or 1 to 5 or whatever it is of how much trash is still there, and then you need to show that it's being reduced to the level of compliance. And so that's essentially what this model and what the briefing is going to go off today is, showing how that visual assessment can be done and then put into the model and the GIS tool to demonstrate that they're actually meeting compliance. And there's an NGO component to it that Nicole will get into too. So I'll stop there. Does anyone have any just original basic questions about the trash policy before I turn it over to Nicole? All right. And Nicole is hoping that this can be interactive. So I think she's going to take some pauses in between to answer questions. So please feel free to interrupt and ask questions. Think about how this can be applied to your watershed or your region or even your organization as you help make sure all cities are complying with the trash policy. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nicole, and she can get us started.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Seth. Sean, I appreciate it. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO and founder of Second Nature. We've been a consulting firm around since 2005. We're out of Santa Cruz. A lot of the science behind the Tahoe crediting program, and in the last 5 years have been working pretty intensely with the Central Coast municipalities and the regional board to help them comply with their stormwater regulations more efficiently and more effectively. So this is something, obviously, the trash amendments have come out as a high priority and something that we've spent a lot of time with our municipalities along the Central Coast and the regional board and trying to make it practical and feasible for them, as well as obviously meeting the requirements. So the way that we've been doing that is through a software platform. We're calling it 2Nform. And we're kind of on a roadmap for this full build out, but we really want the municipalities to be able to monitor, track, and evaluate their programs more efficiently. And obviously, trash is a big part of that. So everything's on mobile data applications. We're looking at really helping them do asset management, just be successful throughout their program throughout the year, such that when they go to do their annual reporting, they're making better decisions, they're collecting better data, and their programs are more effective. And everything is, as Sean said, it's all spatially based, and we are in a pretty a cool partnership with Esri moving forward on this. They're pretty interested in a lot of it. Just two main kind of concepts that set the framework for what we're doing is that when the municipalities come into the platform, the first thing they do is link the urban landscape to the waterways to which they drain. And so that cause and effect linkage, right? The receiving waters are what are regulated and require, what we have the 303D list on. And so we want to track from these stormwater programs how they're implementing their program to mitigate what they can within their municipality to reduce pollutants, including trash to local waterways. This is just highlighting on that EPA, and Sean was in the EPA evolution of the permit workshop with me in March. And what's come out of this is they really want to, get municipalities to comply with their permits such that they're monitoring, tracking, evaluating, and reporting. And that's, again, something that we've had our eye on, and we've been working on this and are continuing to try and provide this solution to help municipalities be more successful. Okay, so we all know this, right? No urban litter, at least from the priority land uses, which essentially the priority land uses are the litter-prone land uses within a municipality, to the local waterways by no later than 2030. We spent a lot of time at the beginning of this, and Sean mentioned it, looking at other approaches that have been done. The Bay Area, this NPR report that came out that said Oakland had gotten to 74.7% of the way there last year, and can we verify it? And that's a big question mark and unlikely given some of those approaches. So that was something we really wanted to do, was provide, again, a way that municipalities are collecting better data, and again, it helps them provide something that's defensible and reliable, so that we can actually make some progress here. And please feel free to interrupt me if you want to. So Sean also touched on this. Track 1 is you're only going to use the full capture systems. Lots of screens, lots of drop inlet filters, etc. And preliminary costs coming out and saying, well, that's a pretty big capital investment, and there's also a significant amount of maintenance, and we may end up with other issues, etc. So from our perspective and working with the municipalities on the Central Coast, that there was a lot of uncertainty. There has been a lot of uncertainty as how the heck do we deal with this track 2, right? What does that mean? How do we demonstrate that we're complying if we're not putting in structures everywhere? So track 2 is a combination of both structures and not structural controls. And as you'll see, what we have developed for the municipalities is that it can track and integrate the progress of both of these. So the first is just everything is tracked in acres. I can answer any questions you want to, but a lot of that trash loading rates and generating a baseline loading rate, again, really difficult to verify. But we can put these maps on the wall, and starting over with the white area here are the priority land uses. This is our example in the city of Salinas. And here are all the places that we either, the state have told us are litter prone, or, they know from their own information, or they've done some initial on-land visual assessment. And we have places that are prone to litter. And all we're doing now is just summarizing that total acreage. So I think the city of Salinas is upwards of 6,000 acres of priority land use. And the idea is that they need to turn those areas green and demonstrate that they have either implemented a functional full capture device and a device that's treating an area and is being maintained, or that they have this kind of full capture equivalency and no litter on land. And so that's the model and what I'll talk about today. So these visual assessments, this is the concept, again, from Second Nature's perspective. It's sustainable land management, whatever it might be. And in this instance, sustainable land management means there's no litter on the land, on the urban landscape. And it's actually relatively easy to assess places that don't have litter. It gets harder to figure out what category you're in as you go from low to moderate to high to very high. But a clean area, not so difficult. So what we did is we took, and this is mostly BASMA work, and Los Angeles has a similar type of approach, but we coded it in a mobile application, and it allows a stream. So like when you go and you ride your bike and it tracks your route, that's the same concept. But while it's tracking the route, it's also, you're basically saying what category you're in. So that allows a large amount of coverage over a short period of time. And then in addition, what we recommend is that the municipalities also can then stop and do more rigorous, like local verification. And we use a 5-gallon bucket for that. We say, okay, within 1,000 square feet, which is about the quarter of a basketball court, which, then it could be longer or skinnier or any particular size, but how much trash could you pick up within that 1,000 square feet? And use this bucket. We have these cool stickers, give those to you guys, but low would be, very small amount, etc. So you can kind of see the exponential increase of the amount of urban mobile litter within a particular area. So we did, this was probably early summer, and just said, okay, well, now that we can pick up, we can do these assessments a lot more efficiently, how much coverage can they get and how much does that take? So we compared it to the State Water Board. I think they refer to it as a TAMLY memo, but just said, look, there's an efficiency here that's really valuable. And knowing that trash is highly variable over space and time, the more data we have, the better we're going to understand the places that are persistently have litter and those that are persistently clean. So with all that data, I can go into this in more and more detail. I'm going to just do it really high level, but we have lines and points, and we basically clip those to the entire municipality. This is for one observation period, one week. We lump weeks together, so you can get a bunch of data in one day. It's not going to make one site more dirty, more trash. Then we do an extrapolation just to expand the data that you have in hand, and then buffer those to the parcels. So we're taking the data at any particular time and looking at how what that result looks like on a spatial extrapolation. Then we have a lot of data, Like we want to do repeat observations. So imagine this is time 1, time 2, times 3. And over time, we integrate that data. And what we do is come up with the likely trash condition in each one of these locations. So that's this nice rainbow map. So this is saying, okay, based on the data in hand, and this is all automated in the platform based on the data that's been collected, what's the likely condition that we have here, and what's our statistical certainty? And we just submitted this computational approach to Journal of Environmental Management. We had a couple of pretty cool public partners on this approach. So we expect it and hope it to be published. But so now it helps understand, right, what is the, like, where are the places where it's likely clean, regardless of whether or not they have full capture systems, and then what's our statistical certainty above that, right? What we're, and the way that it's set up in the platform then is that the municipalities can then have a conversation with their regulator and set what that threshold of certainty is. More and more data and more sampling is required to get a higher and higher certainty level. But over time, if they keep going back to a place that's low litter, we're going to increase our confidence that, if we go back there, that's likely, it's consistently low. So I'll stop there for a second and ask if anyone has any questions. All right, so all of this, and again, in the platform, each one of these pixels and the road locations, they're selectable. It gives the average or likely condition, and then that statistical certainty. And I'll show how that's used to track progress in a second. All right, then the other approach, right, is that they still can use these functional full capture systems. And this is likely. A lot of municipalities have structural BMPs that they've already installed. Some of them have been over-designed or already meet the full capture system definition by the state. So we're working, basically providing that opportunity with the municipalities such that they can understand where their existing BMPs are, which, again, Central Coast folks have just gone through this whole process, and then whether or not they meet the definition. And I'm just going to blaze over this, but I can go in and show you guys a demo if you're interested on how this works. But for a full capture system, we have, they put the location of that structure on the map. And then there are a series of different types. And those types are basically defined by how they capture trash, how they function, et cetera. And there's a series of design specifications that they can upload to keep track of that information for each one of these structures. So that helps them with that whole information management, as well as their justification to the, that should say FCE, that justification to the regional board or the state board that it meets that definition of the 1 year, 1 hour storm and at the 5 millimeter size. The other thing they do is that they manually delineate that drainage area that they're draining to. So you can kind of see some of these examples here where this trash trap has, and this is what we're looking at right here is fake data, but this trash trap is draining and accepts all the runoff from this particular drainage area. So we know that area, and then we know what area of that is that priority land use area. So as long as that is maintained, and we provide simple observations, assessments, again, mobile apps for them to go to that trash trap, make sure that it is, clean of litter and not clogged, it isn't damaged in some way, particularly the screen, that it hasn't lost its capacity, et cetera. So again, empowering the city through interns to go out and do these observations and identify where maintenance is needed. Like this one that is red right here is indicating this needs maintenance, and that if it's treating any priority land use area, that would be deemed in, quote, progress for them. But to help them with their workflows, where do they need to do inspections? Where do they need to do maintenance? How to maintain that? So I'll pause for a second if there are any questions, or I'll.
Nicole, I wanted to just say one thing to explain to folks. So one thing in the trash policy is even for track 2, there's a provision in there that says that the state board expects and hopes that the permittees, even if they take track 2, they'll prioritize full capture devices where it's economically feasible, or where it makes most sense. And so one thing you all should be thinking about is folks develop their plans. is what Nicole just showed. Even if you're doing track 2, and the main reason folks don't want to do track 2 is because of the monitoring and because of the not knowing whether they're in compliance. But even if they do track 2, if they're prioritizing full capture in most areas, then those areas, as she just explained, are kind of carved out of the monitoring piece. They're already deemed in compliance, and so they don't have to do those visual assessments. They just have to do the O&M reports. So one thing to consider, when they're doing these plans, is to let your local municipalities know that even if they do track 2, they should still be prioritizing full capture devices, and that if they are doing such, that their monitoring and demonstration becomes less burdensome because those areas are just automatically deemed in compliance.
Cool. So this is how it gets put together then. And again, all in the platform based on the data, and we generate to-do lists for them to help them understand where they need to do their assessments to increase the areas that they have, achieved this likely low trash over some certainty. And I've just put this 80 in as a placeholder. It just reads better than an X, but know that the municipalities can set this, and that becomes a conversation. So either that low trash above the confidence or certainty, and then where those areas of the full capture systems are. And what the municipalities then see is a map in the places. The dark green means they have been treated, and that's kind of what this crosswalk down here is doing. If they have a full capture system treating a particular drainage area and it's functioning, that's dark green. Or if they have low litter and the certainty is above whatever their threshold that they have defined, that's dark green. And then this in progress concept is the average is low litter, but they may need to increase, again, sampling to increase their statistical certainty. So that would show up in their to-do list as places to do assessment and try and help them better understand, whether or not it is actually low litter or, turn these basically light green to dark green. And same concept here. If a full capture system comes back and it's damaged and they can't, it hasn't been maintained, that then goes to this in progress concept. So you can see the dark green, light green, etc. And all of that then is aggregated and quantified on an acreage basis. So this is the example. If they have, in this instance, 2,230 white areas in their city, this is what they are, that's their current baseline based on what they submitted to the state. We know where those are. 23% of them have been met the full capture system treatment concept, either through low litter or through full capture systems. Another 342 of those areas either need more assessments or they need maintained full capture systems. So this is then by which the municipality can track and report their progress to the regional boards and the state water board. And I glossed over the slide at the beginning, but the way that the Central Coast the regional board is seeing this is that the municipalities get their data in here, they manage it, it's their data, they have full control over it, they can export it any time, and then they lock their records when their annual report is due. And the regulator now has read-only access to their locked records. They can see how much progress they've made and then dive into all the different data records as they need to and have conversations with their permittees. So that's the municipal side. Any questions before I keep going? All right, just going to keep going. We don't have a chatty group here. So the flip side, right, of if it's not in progress and it's not treated is then, well, where are the hot spots, right? Those areas that are not green in our statistical certainty. So we generate a map. We're calling it the planning or the prioritization map. This is within the municipal records as well that helps them identify the locations, and then the certainty, just the flip side, the certainty that the area is actually prone to litter. And the idea is that over time, right, we want all these dark purple areas to go away, et cetera. So it's helping inform their implementation plans as they start spending resources in particular areas and targeting those. Are those effective? And it's pretty easy for them to then collect more data to see whether or not they're detecting a change as a result of, improved street sweeping and putting in parking controls and, community engagement or incentives or whatever the efforts might be. That's just more of the same map. So what also we have done, and we've just piloted this in the city of Salinas, and these are questions that we'll bring with our municipalities. But it's really easy to make these surveys and the data collection apps available to anyone. Right now, and this is the link, and I can send this out or send this PowerPoint out, but you can download and get the app and start dropping pins. And evaluate whether, that magnitude of trash. And again, this is that same concept of the bucket. Within it, there's user guidance, but within 1,000 square feet, how much mobile trash could you collect, cram it into a bucket? Where would it fall on that tape? Right now, what we've been in the city of Salinas, we had them really focus in on one area, Chinatown, to go collect data. We did a whole multi-stakeholder collaboration advisory group. We had like 4 or 5 meetings, and I think we ended up with close to 100 data points, particularly in Chinatown, which we knew was really trashy, but it added additional data. And the opportunities here to use this, we're open to them. I've talked to Jeff at Literati and tried to encourage them to code some sort of a categorical data collection approach on theirs, because we can do the analytics on this. The single piece of trash is really difficult to see whether or not you're detecting a change. So the data collection and the analytics are there, and what happens with that data, whether it's these are conversations with the municipalities, and whether or not that data is available to them or how it gets made available to them. We easily can generate these publicly available trash hotspot maps or condition maps. The way that the data is analyzed, there is some smoothing over time, but there would probably need to be some sort of a QA process to evaluate the public data, but this is easily doable and probably stop for discussion on this and any Sean's input.
Well, I'll just ask, has any NGO or the public been using this yet, or is it just an option available that no one's really taken advantage of yet?
Yeah, so again, in the city of Salinas, we had these monthly meetings, and that was part of the Salinas's implementation plan, was to try and bring a bunch of groups from, we had homeless services, we had all the city staff, the street sweeping guys, they had the county, they had the schools, and what are they called? The vibrancy, people leading these vibrancy plans. And we said, that was the only place that we really pushed this and said, hey, go down. We made them, everybody that showed up, we made them download the app, and then your homework is to go drop 5 data pins. So they started using it. It all comes into our RTS online account. We had some data, played around with it, but we're getting a little bit outside of Second Nature's our mission to push the public use of this, but I think there are opportunities to use this to be able to supplement the data that the cities have to understand where their litter hotspots are and how to target those.
And you mentioned that a city has been using their interns to do the visual assessments, but I've seen cities or counties, work on some type of grant or funding structure with NGOs to do beach monitoring.
Totally.
Could you foresee them doing the same thing here, where rather than paying their interns or whoever to go out and that they could work out some agreement with the NGO so that they can probably do it cheaper and easier?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, those are conversations with the local municipalities. I don't know why not. Again, operationally, it doesn't matter. And from us and our perspective of getting that data into their accounts, there's no problem to do that. In the Tahoe program, they have two different rapid assessments. They're not trash. They're associated with structural BMPs and then the amount of road abrasives on the roads. And those are two, similar to this, two rapid assessments that need to be conducted. And the majority of the cities up there fund the RCDs to do that rapid assessment implementation. So, yeah, from our perspective, it makes no difference. It's really up to the city and the NGO relationship. And I'll just show one more piece because you mentioned this, but we actually also, Salinas, I keep talking about Salinas. All the maps you're seeing are Salinas. This has been our biggest partner recently, and a great opportunity to continue to further the application of these tools. So the city's permit, they're phase one, and they did have, they're about the end of their 5-year permit term and renegotiating their permit currently. But they did have receiving water trash monitoring requirements. They were really, written 5 or 6 years ago. They were pretty complicated, convoluted, etc. So again, working with them and the regional board said, hey, what if can we just do the same thing now in the receiving waters, same concept, and use it to inform where to do litter cleanups. So this is just a breakdown of the entire municipality. There's 12,500 acres within the city of Salinas. Like I mentioned, about 6,200 are PLUs, 6,000 are not priority. And then we basically just clipped out these riparian areas of all the open channels and do the same concept. So walking what I wanted to do is get rid of that graphic. Well, anyway, if you look at the bottom, you can see they're doing the streaming of the lines, same concept of those conditions as they're walking the channel, and then dropping pins to do verification of where those are. And then we do the same spatial and temporal extrapolation of the data that they had, so we know where these litter hotspot areas are and what that current 2018 condition was. And this is then just a breakdown of that 170 acres of riparian area, what their conditions are. And then a bunch of groups working with Save the Whales and the city of Salinas, and there were a couple other outreach groups. So they use that data then to go to specific places to go and pick up trash. So rather than having the people who are out there with good hours counting and enumerating the different types of trash that are there, which, it definitely is helpful for us to know that plastic is pretty persistent in the environment and what its contribution is. Really tried to use these people's hours to pick up trash. And there was a goal. We haven't looked now and gone back and reassessed it, but the goal was to try and increase those low acres by 20% with these groups. So I think for we didn't have a lot of time. This happened pretty quickly, and I think it went pretty well. I think Chloe of my team's on the phone, and she was the one that coordinated all of this, and got, I don't know, how many cleanups did you have, Chloe? 5 or 6?
Yeah, I think we had about 6 cleanups.
Yeah. So again, trying to get these areas. Do you have an idea on how many acres now went from dirty to clean?
I think we got at least about 10% done, but I'm not sure exactly the specific acreage.
Yeah, so 17 acres. Not horrible for a first effort.
That was all by just visual assessment, though?
Yeah, so those are all that same visual assessment, but now we've clipped those assessments to the riparian areas, exactly. So we're just streaming and walking and dropping points and doing the assessments within the receiving waters.
Can I ask, so SFEI and SCORP have been working on with like OPC and State Water Board how they want to do the receiving water guidance. Have you guys been following that at all?
Yeah, I have. We have been a bit following it. It's really difficult to, again, I have a PhD in aquatic chemistry, and it's really difficult to do trash load monitoring. It's super. It's not like pollutants that move conservative or move with water. So yeah, there's a. I think we actually are on SCORP's trash monitoring site as one of the options. I don't know that it mentions what we've been doing in the receiving water concept, but again, we can, it's just a way to get, the level of data that we need fairly efficiently, knowing it's going to change over time, right? They increase the, area of low by, say, 20 acres. That could all be dirty again next year if we don't have better controls within the urban landscape, right? So it's going to be kind of a cause and effect. So we're just kind of our big picture mission is to get the data, the right amount of data as efficiently as possible that's informing the right actions so that we're spending our resources either implementing green infrastructure, or implementing trash controls, or doing whatever we can to make things better. So, but yeah, they're well aware of what we've been doing, SCORP anyway. I think that's here's the last, same concept, right? So now it's fairly simple. We have 170 acres that are white over some time period. Want to turn those green and keep them green, and or make sure they're cleaned up at the end of the year. And again, city of Salinas is, there's a lot of trash in the city of Salinas. There's kind of a lot of trash in a lot of our receiving waters, but particularly in this area. So just trying to, again, get them the right amount of data and empower them to, be able to have conversations with their regulators about what's feasible and how effective their actions are when they're implemented. I think that's all I got.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Does anyone have any questions on that before I put people on the spot?
Hey, Sean.
Hey, Bob, you're the one I was going to put on the spot.
I had a feeling that was coming. One thing I was curious about is the reporting associated with the monitoring, and is it annual reporting right now? And Sean, you may know the answer to this question, but I mean, this is a great tool, for a city to do all this. But what are their requirements for reporting out to the public, and is it available to the public, or is it just five every annual reports that we see this kind of information?
We have not. So there are a lot of different ways that cities can respond to this as far as getting it to the public. Their requirement, and what we have been focusing on, is getting the regional board access annually. So you're right. The concept that we've been working on within 2Nform is that the municipalities are managing their data, they're managing their programs, and then they basically lock those records. We're trying to reduce the countless number of hours in paper that they typically spend generating those big PDF annual reports, and rather lock the results, let the regulator see that. And at some point, we've talked about this and we haven't done anything, but what portions of that then get pushed to some sort of a public portal? Those are discussions that are still in progress, and we can do anything. So again, it really becomes up to the municipalities and the regulators and the NGOs to decide how to best do that.
Yeah, I see. And right now, there are how many track 2s in the state? I mean, I think, are there only 2 permittees, or do you know, Sean, how many people I mean, how many
The
permittees
percent, yeah.
are
That's a good, well, I don't know. So, so I think a lot of our Central Coast groups are going track 2, not all of them. We have 36 or 37 on the platform right now. Again, we basically are still like unveiling the pieces of this platform. So, and we haven't had as many discussions as we should around the state. I think if you talk to most municipalities, they would say they're going track 1. And I think they're also trying to figure out what's going to come out of the regulatory landscape as to what's required for that. But just based on what we have been doing and the progress that is being made, it seems like what we're trying to do is make it easier for municipalities to go track 2. But I would say likely because of the fact they didn't have to write an implementation plan, maybe you're at the 15% of municipalities are going track 2.
Yeah, Bob, so what has happened so far is no regional board has incorporated the trash policy into the permit itself yet. But what has been required is these initial steps to do the plans, to choose track 1 or track 2, and then if you're doing track 2, to come up with, kind of your B&P plan that you're going to be producing. We haven't looked to see what the percentage is, but I think Nicole's right. The majority of folks wanted to do track 1 because of just the compliance certainty. But those are mostly in urban areas, so, Santa Ana, Orange County area, San Diego, San Francisco's got their own program going. In the more rural areas, they're probably thinking of doing the track 2. But as I tried to say earlier, even if you're doing track 2, like take your area, Bob, of I understand that, you guys were pushing more for a track 2, but maybe in areas of Santa Rosa where it's pretty highly urban, they'll likely want to do full capture in the urban part to just make their compliance certainty and their monitoring and demonstrations a little easier on them. And then to answer your first question somewhat, Bob, I think the devil's in the details of the permits. So because none of the trash policy hasn't been actually put into any regulatory permit yet, it's just been in planning. The frequency of reporting, I think, would be done by each regional board as they implement it into the permit. And so, Bob, for you, for the Santa Rosa Phase 1, your regional board would determine that frequency. For other areas, Phase 2, so areas that don't have their own stormwater permit but have the statewide permit, that's going to be coming up in a year or 2, and that'll apply to everywhere where there's not an individual Phase 1 permit.
And I'm really glad that you brought that up, Sean. The Phase 2 permittees have the same requirements, 0 trash by 2030. Is that correct?
Yes, as long as they're in the urban priority areas. So there's certain areas that are so rural that they don't fit the definitions of high density, which I think we define pretty broadly to capture most places. So, Monterey, Salinas, I think Healdsburg would be in there. Those type of areas are all captured. But if you get into the really rural areas, even though they might be under the Phase 2, if they don't have priority land use areas, then the requirements would still be in their permit, but they would just say that they don't have any priority land use areas, and so they wouldn't necessarily have to comply with that piece of it. But there is still, the receiving water piece, and hopefully coming in, we'll talk about this, and I know you and I have talked about this, Bob, but the kind of trash hotspot issue with homeless encampments and high-use beaches, that'll be another area to try to capture areas outside of maybe those high-density areas.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah, great presentation, very informative. I'd like to see it in use in more places. Trying to think if the other thing is, because we're a very rural farm agricultural area, and there's a lot of homeless in our county, especially after the big fire. A lot of people have been displaced, and they can't afford to live here, frankly. It's wine country. But just curious how Salinas is dealing with homeless and how that gets tracked, or does it get tracked? Is it just trash? Or, I mean, how do these, I didn't see much talk about trash hotspots, and I mean, that's what our main concern is, trash hotspots associated with homeless, and because they move around a lot, it's not a set target. Just curious what Second Nature's thoughts on that and tracking that are.
And Nicole, before you answer that, just to clarify, we've been using the word hotspot differently than I think maybe you have to a degree. You know, in the slide you're showing now is more of hotspots within the MS4 that need to come into compliance. Maybe you can tell me I'm wrong. But when Bob's talking about a trash hotspot, or when I refer to it, we're always referring to it as areas outside of the MS4 or outside of the compliance for trash policy. Areas that have a high generation of trash that are discharging directly into the waterway. So homeless encampments, high-use beaches, and regional parks and campgrounds that are along waterways that aren't necessarily discharging to the MS4, but are discharging directly to the waterway. And just for everyone's background, and we've explained this in some of the other briefings, documents we've had, but that was an issue. So areas, hotspots that were outside of the MS4 were originally in the trash policy and were taken out because they wanted to focus on the implementation of the trash policy as it's written now, the MS4 part of it. But to be perfectly honest, it was more of a political concern over the homeless issue. They didn't really know how to handle it at the time. They didn't want to get into the weeds of it. And so they made a promise that they would readdress the issue at a later date, which is where we're at now. The State Water Board just did a workshop on it a couple weeks ago. They're planning another one in 2019, and it's going to be one of their priority projects for their storms strategy, to put that into the policy so that it requires municipalities to identify these areas outside the MS4 that are discharging directly into the waterway. I know Region 2 has a program like that already. It probably needs to be tweaked a little, but just so you know, Nicole, that's kind of what Bob's referring to as a trash hotspot.
Yeah. So, so the map, this is a good point that I didn't clarify. So when we're tracking the progress, that is all just their PLU areas, but they can still collect data anywhere. And so when we do their hotspot maps like this is just everywhere within the municipality. You're right. But there's no reason why this type of data can't be collected anywhere. We have really focused in on, quote, mobile trash. So just making that clarity. So when we did the multi-stakeholder process at this group through Salinas, this came up over and over again. Illegal dumping and homeless encampments within the receiving water were, a big issue. The group, there's a group called Downtown Streets Team, and they were in the room the whole time. They're in, I think they're in San Francisco, but they're definitely in San Jose, Santa Cruz, around, and they're awesome. I highly recommend you kind of Google them. But they've got it. They basically try to, peer-to-peer get the homeless folks kind of upward mobility, and part of their requirement to stay in the program is every single day they go and pick up litter. And so using them within that community to try and help reduce the amount of litter. And it's not going to solve the homeless problem totally, but it does kind of help them have a little bit of a, more of a value, and use them as a workforce to kind of help control urban litter. Similarly, we have a monitoring program. We're doing outfall monitoring in the city of Salinas, and had, homeless folks come and live in our monitoring system. So the cities had to kind of deal with this as well. And, it becomes a bigger issue really, really quickly. And all I can say from our perspective is that it allows the data to be collected such that you have information to then decide, one, understand where those areas are. And then if you do implement some sort of a change, whether or not it's effective, but we gotta, those are all issues that have come up through the process we've been working on with Salinas for sure.
And Nicole, just so I believe Russian River Keepers, so that's Bob's program. They have a program very similar to the Downtown Streets team that you discussed. I think part of their program is actually modeled after it. And so one thing CCK is going to be doing, has been doing to a degree, but is going to be working on more in 2019, is connecting, Russian River Keepers program to the Downtown Streets team, to also our Inland Empire Waterkeeper has been doing work similar to this. And I know Tahoe, to a lesser degree, homeless, but more on,
Tourism.
beaches,
Yeah,
camps on the water. Connecting those groups together for when we do these workshops, when the State Water Board does these workshops, they want to focus somewhat on homeless encampments and beyond trash to also encompass bacteria. But we're going to be bringing those groups together to present to the State Water Board everything they've been doing on the ground to kind of act as a model that can be replicated throughout the state.
yeah. They're huge, huge issues, huge challenges, and trying to, the Salinas process was pretty cool, and just trying to get folks to think outside the box. And again, from our perspective, being able to have the data to evaluate where the problems are, and then probably more importantly, if you do spend resources or try and change programs, having the ability to collect data to demonstrate that the change has occurred. Just even simple stuff like illegal dumping. There was a lot of discussions about the challenges associated with, it's a relatively disadvantaged community. They, in Salinas, they all work 6 days a week, and the dump's closed on Sunday. So there were a lot of discussions about, well, could the dump maybe change their days or their hours? Like, would that make a difference? Is there a way to see whether or not that would influence? So again, trying to figure out how to get the data and then implement some of those changes that maybe aren't that challenging, and see whether or not they influence a change. But it's a social challenge for sure.
Hey, Nicole, this is Caitlin Kalua speaking over Sean's mic. One question on the utility of the actual app. Is there a way to track whether it was following a storm event or a wet weather event versus human activity, such as an encampment or illegal dumping, or any way to kind of track those different sources?
There's certainly ways that we could put that into the app. I don't think we have that in there right now, but there's no reason that if there was something that would be useful information. As far as the storm events, we have precipitation, right? We can use a precipitation record and see whether or not, how close was it to antecedent runoff, et cetera. But we're not opposed to helping you guys think about how to collect that data so that when it comes out, the results are more informative for sure.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Nicole, when either Salinas or when you guys did the receiving water cleanup, are there rules around when you do the visual assessments? Do you do them before a wet weather event? Do you do them after? Have you been following this?
Well, that's kind of the way that it has been done. We are of the, my personal opinion is that obviously it's going to vary over space and time, and we want to better understand that variability, and we don't right now. We can use some basic concepts about you use the example of tourism, right? Like Tahoe beaches, those are going to be way more prone to litter in the summertime and, before everybody goes back to school than they are right now, et cetera. So using the example, which we haven't defined any, we're starting to think about, okay, if you have to do a minimum level of effort, when across the year would the municipalities potentially do that? And that's kind of the temporal consideration. And then the spatial is maybe they don't need to sample everywhere all the time and more focus in on the places where they're trying to detect or expect change and or increase their confidence in the places that they are clean. I'll use the analogy in the Tahoe Basin, and road rapid assessment that they do to evaluate whether or not the road is basically clean of the abrasives that they put down in the winter before those summer or spring rains come and wash all the roads and mobilize all that fine inorganic material into the lake, which then impairs the clarity. When we spent a lot of time thinking about the seasonal data collection and sampling there, they have, I think, 2/3 of their effort is really focused in from March to May. So we've gotten through the winter season, we've protected driver safety, now get those roads clean before the rains clean them anyway, and collect that data that way. So we haven't necessarily been asked to do that yet, but there are probably things we can think about on when is the trash most likely, and then make some kind of strategic recommendations.
Great, thanks, Nicole. And just for everyone else, I believe the state board put out some type of guidance, and it might have been just to the regional boards on, when to do it, how many times. But that's something that's going to be permit specific. So for all of you, watchdogging your specific permits, that's something you're going to want to keep an eye out for, is the monitoring protocol to make sure that they're assessing it the right time and the right amount of times.
Yeah, in the Bay Area, they do one wet, one dry, I think, and then they have all these rules around when the last street sweeping effort was, and it's really hard to track. It's really hard to have enough information, and again, I think we can smooth a lot of the results of the data by just being able to collect the data more efficiently and get more data. So.
Great. Did anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, Sean, this is Bob again. I just had a clarification question, I think, more than anything, and it was on the full capture areas that are carved out of the compliance, like monitoring, and I just wanted to get a grasp on that. So if they go with all these full capture areas, does that lessen their monitoring, or and get them out of compliance? I mean, I know if they go track 2, they're on the hook for a lot more, obviously, because they have to show equivalency with that. But when the full capture devices and areas are in place, does that remove them possibly from less providing less monitoring to the board, and less chance of us getting a hold of that information? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So I'll give you my view, and maybe Nicole has a different take on it, but that was kind of what my first point was trying to make, was even if you do track 2, so if you look at the screen now, look at the map on the left, if you look at that very dark hexagon or whatever it is, let's say that was a full capture device. So basically, when you put in a full capture device, what the amount of the watershed that it captures, that part is shaded in green, and essentially you're found in compliance for that portion. Everything that drains into that green full capture device there on the left side would be considered deemed in compliance. So to answer your question, Bob, yes, there would be less monitoring or less demonstration necessary by the permittee because they put in that full capture device. Now, they do have to show that it's being maintained, that it's working properly, as Nicole said, but they would no longer have to be doing visual assessments in that area, because it's assumed that the full capture device is capturing all that trash once it enters the MS4. And so, depending on your strategy, if you want folks putting things in the ground and making sure that the full capture is there, you want to make sure your municipalities know that even if you do track 2 and you don't like it because you're have more of a monitoring burden, the more full capture you put in, the less of a burden that becomes.
I see. Thanks for that clarification.
And this is just CCKA's position. Other folks might have a different take on it, but I would still say, even though track 2 is putting in full capture for this stuff, I think all permittees are still responsible for demonstrating compliance with the water quality standard in the receiving water, regardless of track 1, track 2, full capture or not. That's a piece of the permitting, or excuse me, piece of the monitoring that at least the water keeper's position is still is required, is the receiving water piece.
Yeah, I just there's been a lot of push about asset management, so I think they're monitoring now if they put full capture systems even at the quote, end of the pipe concept, where if they can put in these large structures, they can treat, really large 300, 400, 500 acres. Right, the permits are going more towards demonstrate that you're maintaining those assets, so that becomes their monitoring requirement. And a lot of the state approved units, they have pretty frequent recommended inspection intervals. So again, that's something we're trying to help the municipalities manage, is when those inspections need to be done so that they can track them the right way and make sure they're maintained and get credit for them.
Anyone else have any other questions? All right, before we sign off, I don't know if anyone has questions more generally on the toolkit. So we've sent out 2 newsletters now. One of them was just the first introduction. So that toolkit went to just the folks that identified themselves as being the trash champions and kind of tracking for their region. If there are folks that want to be included on that listserv, let me know and we can add them. But hopefully everyone so far has gone to the trash toolkit and looked at it. Hopefully it's helpful. If there are things that you either have questions on, things you think we need to include, update, whatever it might be, don't be shy to contact me and ask those questions. And if necessary, our next briefing could be just on the toolkit and we can go through the tools more specifically. There was the original briefing I did on the trash policy and why it's important that we track it. That's posted on the website. Hopefully we can post this one today on the website as well. But if folks have just general questions on that, you can say them now or email me later. We want to make it as helpful as possible to all the NGOs as these get implemented. And I said that none of the permits have been, or none of the regions have implemented the policy into the permit yet, but a bunch of them are about to start coming up. A lot of municipal permits have been delayed because of the unfunded mandates issues that have been going on in the courts. The state board has informed the regional boards to move forward, to not, they were on pause. They took the pause button off. So places like Orange County, Inland Empire, San Diego, Ventura, those areas should all be coming up fairly soon to reincorporate this. So I want the toolkit to be as helpful for you all as possible. So let me know if there's something missing or if you have any questions. And for the other folks, there have been 2 permits that have been adopted since the trash policy, the Central Valley and Tahoe. And the regional boards just decided not to implement the policy into the permit. I think Tahoe's was more, they just really weren't paying attention to the issue. But Central Valley did it on purpose because, 1, they just never liked the trash policy. They were always against it, the Central Valley was. But 2, they just thought that they'll do it in the next permit cycle. And so just so everyone knows, CCK is pushing back on that at the State Water Board, because under the Clean Water Act, they were actually legally required to incorporate it. They don't have the option of ignoring the standards. So same thing with you all. If, in your region, they try to take what the Central Valley did and say, oh, we're not going to put the policy into the permit until, 2024, 2025, whenever it is. There's 2 things you should know. One is permittees, regardless of when the policy requirements go into the permit, as Nicole said at the very beginning, no one has time past 2030. So if a regional board, or let's just take the Central Valley, they're not going to do the permit until 2023, that gives those cities and municipalities only 7 years to come into compliance rather than 10 for the policy. So the regional board's actually doing the permittees a disservice. But the second part, more legal in nature, is the Clean Water Act just demands that this trash policy is a water quality objective, and it's required that it be put into permits when the permits get reissued. So if any of that comes up in your regions, I don't really anticipate it, But if it does, let me know and we can help push back too, because we're pushing back pretty hard on the Central Valley right now. So unless anyone else has any questions, I just thank you, Nicole. That was super helpful. And we really appreciate getting to understand how folks are going to be demonstrating compliance with Track 2.
Thanks. Yeah. Good luck.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Sean.